Welcome back to the Delovely Podcast. We feature conversations with people who are curious, creative, and committed to building whole communities where diversity and inclusion is celebrated. In this episode, we talk about the important issue of employment, and we have a special guest.
I'm Jen Cook, and my company is J. Cook Workforce Solutions, and I primarily am a contractor with the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation here in New Hampshire, and I support people who experience disability to get jobs.
Before we get to our conversation with Jen, let's put it into context. The truth is, in the United States, our historic reliance on system-centered solutions to help people achieve their goals of getting jobs that they want, where they're known and connected, has been a failure, and we need disciplined approaches to working against this bias. Congregate settings, pre-vocational shelter work, enclaves, clearing crews, dropping baked goods off at convenience stores. These all represent cognitive distortions on the part of policymakers, and we need to change. Person-centered approaches in employment are a key to making sure that people live full lives in the community. One area that we turn to for information on employment and the status of employment in the country is the National Core Indicators Project. They indicate on their website that a key concern for policy and practice is how choice is supported for people with disabilities. And the National Core Indicators collects data on employment status, including whether individuals are working in a paid job in the community, as well as each person's interest in doing so. Their recent report reveals some interesting statistics. One is that approximately 20% of individuals supported by participating community agencies worked in a paid community job in 2016-2017 data collection year. Of the 80% who did not have a paid community job, almost one half, or 48%, indicated they would like one. And only 40% of the people who stated they would like a paid community job had this goal documented in their individualized service plan. There's another project that helps us understand the status of employment in the country, and that is Think Work. This is a project funded by the Administration on Disabilities and the Administration for Community Living. They have an interesting website that lists promising practices, which is a database that highlights innovative policies and strategies that state IDD agencies are using to increase integrated employment opportunities. We'll give you some more information on that in the show notes. So let's move on to our great conversation about how person-centered practices and approaches can be used to support people in developing careers. Thank you very much for being on our podcast today, Jen.
My pleasure.
So let's just chat about, we were talking before, you have been applying person-centered thinking strategies in the effort to help people develop careers and get jobs.
With everybody.
With everybody.
That I work with, regardless of what brings them to Voc Rehab or VR.
Okay.
So even if somebody has a PhD, I still, I use it with everyone. I might apply it slightly differently depending on the individual, but I use the important for tool with an employment focus for everybody. And I apply it in two different ways.
Okay.
One is as a get to know you tool.
Yes.
That gives me insight into how the person is, and I ask questions like, what bugs you, what gets under your skin.
Oh, yes.
I don't have a specific script. I don't have a list of questions, specific questions, written material that I ask. It's sort of loosely the same, but it really depends on the person and what I can kind of glean from them.
So it sounds like a branching conversation.
Yes.
We talk about, and you use that to discover important to. So this is what I'm hearing.
So the important for those boxes on the form, the tool, tend to be smaller, but it's a launching point than what is important for others to know or do.
I see.
That's where the meat of it is for me, in terms of how I apply it. So we have things in there, and they're all I statements. They're not the person or you. And I help them certainly wordsmith it because I want it to be as much their language as possible, not mine. But to sort of capture the essence of what, it helps me too, rather than saying I can't.
Gotcha.
So what are the strategies? What are the,
to best support?
Exactly. And I need to find a more contemporary reference. But when I'm asking people, I'm talking about learning style, I tend to use, for people who know what the reference is, a boombox.
Yeah.
Right? Let's say you get a brand new, the big things that people carried around in the 70s, on their shoulders. And that you get a brand new one and it's got buttons and dials and levers and colors and it's just huge. And you take it out of the box, it's set in front of you, what do you do first? And some people are like, oh, well, I turn it on. So they're tactile, they're very hands-on. They really, everybody, there are elements to style, all kinds of style for each person.
Yeah.
But people have their sort of primary ways that work for them.
Yeah.
And other people, I use an example, well, my professor father would read the manual.
Gotcha. Oh, interesting.
Right?
Yes.
Some people want to read, and other people go, Mom! Right?
Right.
They want help.
Yeah.
They want someone to demonstrate.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and usually there's some combination of those things, but it becomes very clear in how they answer into what their learning style is.
That's fascinating, and that's a very concrete, one can imagine doing that, getting an electronic thing, but I never thought about how different people would answer differently based on their learning style, but that makes sense.
Yeah, and so it's a launching point for people who like written things. Checklists tend to be very helpful tools at a work site. For instance, to learn a job or to remind one of a job. Hey, I use checklists all the time. I need my checklists. And how much information is helpful, and what is new learning versus sort of maintenance, if you will, right, in terms of a skill or a task. So the important 2, important 4 are sort of the launching point to get into what is important for other people to know or do.
Gotcha. And may I ask, important 2 and 4 is of course the core concept.
Yes.
And use of the important 2, 4 is helpful in bringing that forward to the potential employer.
Yes, I'm glad you asked that.
Okay.
So when I think about my audience, the person who's going to read it,
Gotcha.
Obviously the individual, it belongs to them.
Yes, correct.
Right? But a future employer.
Okay.
So if I was going to be, I was an employer and I was hiring somebody, what would be helpful for me to know, right? And so in understanding what's important to and what's important for a person, I tend to just put it in a different place on the form. I can show you some examples because I have permission from a few folks to share with you. The other way I use the tool, so I do it as a get to know,
yes,
and which also gives me information as I'm meeting with employers and I'm seeing postings or whatever it is. That this person, right, some of that matching. But the other way I use it is if the person chooses to disclose to the business, because that is their choice. Most do. Tends to be folks who are more mental health that tend to decline, and I understand it's stigma related.
To disclose what?
To disclose disability.
Gotcha.
And I will respect whatever an individual wants to do, obviously. But you can't really expect an accommodation if you need an accommodation at the workplace if they don't understand why. Right? Doesn't mean you have to give away the farm. You don't have to say, well, when I was born. But with their permission, and most people do give their permission, that this tool, which gets added to and revised, it's not a one and done, gets given to the employer when they're hired.
Yeah.
Lives in their personnel file. So it's not, it's just for management staff, need to know.
Yeah.
And of course, most folks, most employers say, wow, I wish I had this for everybody. Right? But to give you an example, there was an individual that I supported who has like an 8 to 10 second processing delay before answering a question.
Okay.
And, businesses have turnover just like everybody else. Business, it's the way of the universe.
Yeah.
So managers, you might have a stellar manager.
Right.
But when they go away, right?
How do you record that learning?
Right. And you want it to be sustainable. You want the employment situation to be sustainable,
yes,
not contingent on a particular individual
Wonderful.
at the business.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And so there was a turnover in management, and I was still involved with the person, and I had suggested, well, there's this document that is in his personnel file, and I worked with the individual. I said, would you like him to see that? He said, yeah, that'd be a good idea. So the manager looked at it, and the first thing he said was, oh, he's not ignoring me.
Super.
I get it.
Yeah. Very good.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Sometimes we put that in the communication charts. When you see me do this in this situation, this is how you respond. But
right.
Yeah, we misinterpret that type of thing a lot.
Right. And so so employers can refer to those, and especially when they have turnover. But if they're having an issue, oh yeah, this person needs me to do checklists and chunk them into bite-sized pieces, not something mammoth.
Yes.
Oh, this person this benefits this person. Oh, they're a black and white thinker. They're not getting the sarcasm that the banter. They're misunderstanding that. So I use that tool in those two ways. One is to get to know you, and one is for the employer, if the individual wants to share, to share.
Yeah.
Now, branching off that, I usually do that first. That's the very first thing I do when I meet with a person. And sometimes they may have somebody else that contributes to that too, who's there. It may not just be the individual, it might be a family member, parents, a paid support person.
To help remember and elaborate on
exactly
what you're collecting.
Yep. And then the next thing I do is resume development. And I sort of base that, I do base that on the one-page profile, the spirit of that. I don't use that actual format, but the spirit of what a one-page profile is for.
What do you mean by spirit?
So, to give you an example, many individuals that I work with, as I had mentioned before, tend to be transition age, younger, looking for entry-level jobs. But even those who aren't, there may be big gaps in work history. There may be no work history. There may have had some internships at school, but they were only like a month long. And when I talk to individuals, about their resumes, it's not just what the hard skills. I mean, one of the things we get in the conversation with the important for tool is, certainly their, interests and ability and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But hard skills can be taught. You can be taught the Walmart way.
Okay.
Or the Bed Bath & Beyond way of doing whatever the task is.
Okay. Yeah.
But you can't teach someone to be honest.
I see.
You can't teach someone to be patient.
Right. And that's what you're calling soft skills.
Right.
Gotcha.
So the soft skills tend to be, so I structure the resume, with a summary statement, and then a bulleted list of qualifications, skills, attributes, personality traits, those kinds of things that get at the root of the core of the person, like what makes them tick, what they really, just what kind of person they are. And those are things that are really attractive to employers, because employers know they can train people to do whatever task it is. Right. But boy, you see a list, you've got somebody who's, I'll give you an example, individual who really, really actually wanted to shag carts in a big store. Really wanted to. His cousin does it. It sort of was his thing. So, okay. Well, he actually doesn't mind weather. Freezing cold, very hot. He just says, well, what do you do when it's cold? Dress warm. Okay. So, but ultra dependable, polite, friendly, doesn't complain about the elements. An employer took one look at that part of the list and said, I want to offer you the job.
That's what
Didn't even look at the rest of it.
Yeah. It's interesting. In any recruitment process, you're trying to, through the interview process, figure out those soft skills. But oftentimes, we're always the best version of ourselves in an interview.
Right.
And you would love to have, a really clear, thoughtful description of who you are as a personality so that you can offer it to the right person and everybody can be happy.
Exactly.
But I can see that. So you're helping the employer and the person.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, that's what I mean, sort of the spirit about the essence of the person and what really makes them tick.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what people like and admire about them.
Exactly. Yeah. I've actually had a number of individuals be offered the job at an interview even before they did an application, based on the interview, the conversation, and that resume document.
Because it's giving you what's in the interview.
Right. I also had an interview with an individual who has a pretty significant brain injury, and she had given her permission to share the important 4 tool with the employer prior to the interview, right, as well as her resume.
Yeah.
And the employer had told me after he hired her, by the way, it was a completely customized job, created a job for her.
Gotcha.
Based on what she loves to do and what none of them wanted to do, but she really likes.
That's neat.
But he told me later that he really appreciated having those documents, because one of the things in her the what other people need to know or do section of that form spoke to the fact that instead of saying and, she uses the word but all the time. Mm-hmm. It's her speech, just how she speaks. So it wasn't that she was negating anything. She wasn't saying that. It just was the way she says and.
A unique verbal tick, kind of.
Right.
Replacing one word with the other.
Right, but tends to have a negative connotation for folks.
But gives you total different insight and interpretation if you know about that switch.
If you know about it up in advance. And the employer said, oh yeah, so that was really helpful to know, because then I dismissed it. It wasn't a big deal.
Yes.
And then he could concentrate on the things about her characteristics and attributes that were things that he said, oh yes, we have a need.
Neat.
We can create a job for this person.
Yeah, neat. I've worked with a lot of staff who are starting to use person-centered practices and some of the skills, and they're thinking about working with folks who have not yet entered the job market, either because of moving out of high school, or they're changing their service design, their service model from a setting to a natural experience in the community. So what would you say is the most useful process for helping people in that effort to not only think about the idea of where can somebody work with pre-existing jobs, but also, as you say, customized jobs, which is something that's not always familiar to people. But is there a particular process and set of skills that you find most useful in that kind of situation when you're doing a service redesign and a movement of people to natural settings?
Yes. I mean, if you're talking about, the sort of the customization of employment, that I don't rely solely on what is posted as an opening.
Okay.
An advertisement for a position.
Okay.
In talking with businesses, businesses like nothing better than to talk about themselves. They should. Mm-hmm. They're proud of what they do, and they should be proud of what they do. Mm-hmm. So asking questions of the employer to get to know them, to get to know more about their culture, to get to know what's important to them, and where their needs are, and asking questions like, well, it sounds, just to give you a off-the-cuff kind of example, to say to an employer, it sounds like, you have, your staff have a lot of demands. Your managers are doing so much of this stuff. Is there anything that, if you had your wish, what would you wish that they were focusing their time doing?
Your current staff.
Current staff. And there may be a niche then, and not to give people jobs that aren't of value, but often people who are entering the workforce are looking for entry-level jobs, which, tend to be more repetitive, or, wow, I really wish I could, my staff were more up on current product, the latest products. Wow, well, they're spending all their time doing this. Do you think, just something to think about, there might be somebody who's looking for some part-time work that could take some of those tasks off their plate and thereby freeing up your staff to do what you really, really want them to do. And teaching somebody valuable skills at the same time. So that can be helpful. Also, asking people, and this can be a little tricky, but getting businesses to do a job trial can be really helpful. There's a woman that I had supported who ended up working at a local convenience store / gas station. Initially, the employer was like, no, everybody has to do everything. They have to run the register, they have to do the pumps, they have to clean the bathrooms, they have to, everything. But in talking with the employer, noticed that their coffee bar was a mess. Well, because nobody had time to, when they were busy. And of course, businesses like that make money on people coming into the store, right? So they want to draw people in. So this woman lived to clean. Love to have her at my house. She really enjoyed that and seeing the completion of a task. And so the owner agreed to do a trial with her, just doing cleaning, the coffee bar and the sort of the hot dog station area, a little island. And he was impressed and hired her, and then found that his sales on coffee skyrocketed the days she was working because it was so inviting.
Fantastic.
And there were regulars.
And it's a big draw.
Right. Adding that position paid for itself.
Wonderful.
And then some, right?
This is the interesting thing, and before I got to know the field that you're in, my assumption was that the job was get to know people who need a job, help them look in the paper, help them with the interview. But what you're describing and what I've come to understand and really admire is a lot of your work is meeting with employers, as you say, understanding their culture, and then offering them the benefit of improving their workflow.
Exactly.
By saying, as you said, have you considered this? By the way, I have somebody who could fit into that.
Yeah.
So that's very cool.
I also think it's really important. I'm part of a workforce coalition, and most of the regions in the state of New Hampshire have a workforce coalition. So here in Concord, the workforce coalition is made up of job developers like me. This one is facilitated by Voc Rehab. The facilitator is a VR person. In the old days, which weren't all that long ago, job development agencies, employment agencies, would develop a relationship with an employer and then feel ownership of that employer. And should be proud of developing a relationship. But what would happen is people who sort of kind of fit maybe into a particular job were sort of pushed into doing that when it really wasn't the best match. And so what the coalition does, we share resources, we share leads. Not every agency is involved. Some are still very insular, and I can respect that. However, by sharing, I have shared job leads and success stories and those kinds of things with my peers, who are also my competitors, but my colleagues. And many of them are independent, people like me, and some work for larger organizations, and vice versa. And we've both gotten people jobs that way. And the thing that's most germane to that is that it's about the business, not just the individual. So I have two customers, the business and the person, the job seeker. It has to work for both of them. It's not just about this person has a disability, you need to give them a chance. Businesses hire people because it helps their business, right? And so it needs to work for them. Now, it may require some additional effort, like with the using the important 2 important 4 tool, that the person might need some additional support beyond what they normally would provide, an extended training period, et cetera, a one-to-one mentor, that kind of thing. But it's really about what the business wants and needs. So we are looking to find them the best candidate. And it's not always my company that has that person.
I see. You call it a coalition. It sounds like a cooperative almost.
It really is, yeah. And some really great stuff has come out of that. And sometimes an employer might say, gee, Jen, I say I'm a part of a coalition. I'm part of this collaborative. And, if I don't have somebody, I'm going to reach out and, hey, it's free job development for you, free recruitment, right? Find somebody that will really fit with them.
And businesses talk to each other, so it's to everybody's benefit that you as a group have a good reputation with helping people who are on the margins, perhaps.
And setting people up for success. So the important Too Important For tool, those kinds of things, because voc rehab services by nature are designed to be temporary.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
And temporary is kind of a loose term. It depends on the person, but it's not a long-term sustainable thing. You want the job to be sustainable. I mean, I look at employment as having 4 components: find a job, learn a job, keep the job, and grow the job. And growing the job might mean getting a different job. It might be time to, move on.
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't stay with people through that whole process, but I want to set people up for success to be able to do those things.
Great.
So you want to support the employer. It's not placement and bye-bye. At the same time, you don't want to overly service somebody. I mean, the response, in my opinion, the response to an issue is not more service. It's to look at what can we do to support the employer to support their employee in a way that's sustainable.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
So here's a couple other questions before we finish our time together. One is, do you provide trainings for organizations?
I do.
You do?
I love doing that.
And what is a typical one that you would offer?
I often use 4+1 in helping organizations understand what's in the forefront, what they're thinking,
Sure.
Sort of how they answer. I use that quite a bit, actually.
And then you customize the training from there, it sounds like.
Yes.
Yeah. And do you do presentations?
Yep, I actually was invited to do breakout sessions for the annual DSP conference here in New Hampshire, which I did. It went really well, and people really enjoyed it. And one of the things that I did, which I find, some visual that may really help. And I took pieces of copy paper and in marker wrote down all kinds of different jobs. And then I taped them all over the walls. So when they walked into the room, there were all these sort of different jobs, and some that people wouldn't necessarily think of, like these customized some of these customized positions, and things that involve skills that people might not necessarily think a person might possess. But it's about giving people a chance, right? Like people working a cash register who never quite learned how to count money. Some people had commented on that it was powerful to see that many things, and some that they were like, oh. And I would say, and the person who I know who has that job experiences Down syndrome.
Oh, interesting.
And some things that, and not by anybody's fault, but people tend to go into that can't mode, or, oh, yeah, that person really can't do that, or they're going to be made fun of, or they're going to get hurt. There's just a fear base often, and then saying, oh, telling parallel stories is very powerful. I do that in trainings a lot.
Tell me more about parallel stories.
So parallel stories to me are stories about when something really worked out for somebody in a surprising way, right? And sometimes not even that surprising, but when we talk about families and individuals themselves may be fearful of being ostracized or being treated unfairly or differently or badly. And people really should be known for their gifts, right?
And is that the parallel story? Communities are places of abundance rather than scarcity, and people are not a bundle of their deficits. They are, they have gifts to offer.
And everybody is stronger.
When everyone is included.
When everyone is included, exactly.
Excellent. And so that's the parallel story, is here's this version of how we might be thinking about the future, and here's...
Yeah, and some about particular people. In a general way, obviously, to protect confidentiality.
But stories are powerful.
But those stories about how something worked for somebody and why, and that it really involved people taking a risk and examining what is reasonable risk, and being pleasantly surprised is a powerful tool. And I use that in trainings a lot, because it means something to folks to have a real person example.
Yes.
Right.
I can imagine it's very powerful and helpful for people who love the person, who, as you say, reasonable risk.
But it also can be very helpful to an employer.
Okay.
Trainings that I've done with employers.
The risks to their business.
Right. It's like, why can't we take a chance and try this person doing these things? What's the worst that could happen?
What could do that?
Exactly. And jobs have come out of that.
That's excellent.
We'll take a chance.
That's excellent.
As long as they know that they're supported. Right?
Well, I'm sure that there are groups and probably parent groups that would be very interested in having you share some of those stories.
Oh, I'd love to.
That'd be great.
I'd love to.
Thanks again for spending some time talking today. I love what you're doing, and it's a great way that you are applying person-centered practices to employment.
Facilitation is one of my favorite things, and that really is that core skill, is to be able to facilitate getting asking the right questions, getting information without being afraid of the correct question. But Roy, it's been wonderful.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thanks so much. As you can hear, Jen works one person at a time. That's how we achieve real outcomes. The solution lies in a system's capacity to create economic space where people like Jen can do their work, so that the people we support can get to work. Delovely is a media production of First Person Services and is sponsored by listeners like you. Pitch in to keep the podcast going strong. Find us at patreon.com/Delovely. Have fun, everybody.